Welcome and good evening. Thank you for any of you joining us tonight. We are in our fifth and final Behind the Workshop series, part of our Forward a New Work series here at Prologue Theater. My name is Jason Tamborini. I'm the artistic director of Prologue. And tonight I am joined by two designers, Patrick Lord and Deb Sivigny. Welcome, both of you. Thank you so much for joining us. This is probably one of the fewer times I can remember getting a chance to talk about design specifically in a workshop setting. So if I could have you both just kind of tell us a little bit about yourselves and a little bit about your experience with workshops, that'd be awesome. Deb, if you want to start first.
Sure. Hi, I'm Deb Sivigny. I've been working and living in the DC area for, oh my gosh, like coming up on 20 years now. Mainly working as a costume designer, and then for maybe the past, I don't know, 7 years as a scenic designer. So now I can sort of proudly say I'm doing both. But I also identify as sort of a multi-hyphenate artist. I've also done some playwriting, some producing, and all the things that sort of go in between. But I've been working pretty consistently the entire time on new plays and new play development, and thinking like a design dramaturg, and doing all the things that that show up in new play land. So yeah, that's me.
Cool. Patrick.
Cool. Yeah, I am Patrick Lord. I am a projection and video designer, and I've been in the DC area for I think 5 or 6 years, really. And yeah, I'm not a multi-hyphenate artist. I really do just do projection and video design for the most part. But I also work on a lot of new plays, just because of the nature of being a projection and video artist. There's a ton of new work that's being developed in that area. I went to a school, and when I went to UT, they have a huge new work program there with playwriting. So I've done a lot of it. A huge amount of my work has been doing new work development. So
cool. So in the case of, both of you have worked in a lot of new work in different ways. When in the process are you typically, if you're going to be working with a new work, when are you typically brought in as a designer? Or is there a typical, like, I'm brought in at this point?
I was like, Patrick, go for it.
I think there's two different kind of worlds that we're talking about that we should clarify too, of like new work versus workshops, because I know that that's kind of a container for this, because like a lot of times for like new work that's going to be produced, that can be slightly different than workshopping. I think that for me, like I've been brought in a lot of new work. I'm usually brought in once there's a script. Like I'm very rare. I don't think I've ever been brought in when there's like an idea. I've usually brought in like once there's at least a draft of a script and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And with workshops, it's rarer. I've been a part of a few of them, but I think that from my experience and what I've noticed, it's more workshops tend to be they rely on company managers or other company members or people like that, but it's rare to bring in designers into that process if there's not expected to be a final product, which I'll answer your question and then preface it with a statement of, I think that that's a misstep in a lot of ways, or a missed opportunity for a lot of places. I think that designers should be brought in a way that much earlier than they are, or more consistently.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that quite a few companies, it's like, here's a script. We're told, oh, it will change. And I mean, of course, that's the expectation, it will change probably a lot. I've gone in as a costume designer, with one set of characters, and then I've like walked out of the play with a completely different set of characters, or like 6 new, or 3 get cut, or, it's part of the flexibility that I think we just need to have. But again, that might be in the production process. I don't know. I think the theaters get a little wary about it, that like if you've got a lot of money on the line, or, a very short time span, often theaters are trying to cram the new play process into the same amount of time that they're giving to a play that's already been written and published and isn't changing. I think that is one misstep that I've seen some theaters do, is they're like, oh, we're just gonna like get it all in 3 weeks, right? And you're like, oh, okay, I hope you're not gonna change anything because I've got to plan it all in advance. But I think that, yeah, I'm usually brought in when the script is mostly done, big quotes there, and then expected to just kind of roll with it for the process, whatever that may bring, and however many changes get made, often in preview, because that's when the thing is actually on its feet, which is like very late in the game. But it's also kind of why I love it. It's exciting. It's, you think on your feet, you're thinking so fast, you're problem solving as fast as the challenges are coming up. And there is something incredibly exhilarating about that. I mean, some may just call it nuts, but I'm like, I love new play development because it is like breakneck paced, and you just have to make, fast decisions with big implications. And that's, I don't know, it's fun and it's insanity.
Yeah, I mean, I love being brought in for new work because of this idea of like that we're in there from the beginning for the whole story. We're in there as early as we can for the whole story, and it means that the room becomes really, the exciting thing about that room is that it's inviting everyone to talk about the story in a different way than you're actually being brought in, because it's like, oh, is this line working? And it's like anyone in the room can say like, oh, actually it isn't, versus when you're in a room with like an established play, they're not going to be asking the designers or other people like if that's reading as well or if that's working as well. But like in that room, it's a much more collaborative environment, and I think that that's kind of something that I say all the time is like, we got to stop. I have a dog, so I apologize. That might happen. That we got to think outside of our little like boxes of like, oh, it's, I have more opinions on the work than just as a projection and video designer.
Yeah, but that constantly happens. Well, or I guess I should not say con. I find that happens a lot in that work up to production, in that rehearsal process, where with certain productions, there's a lot of collaboration leading up to like previews, etc. And then with others, depending on where you're working, it's very much like everybody works in their boxes. But then with the developmental process, with a workshop, I've never actually done been a part of a workshop where designers are brought in from the get-go, where they're earlier on in this series of discussions and conversations, I got a chance to talk with Rex Daughtry, and one of the things he talked about was this idea of the workshop process focuses on the what, and then you move into the how you're going to do it. And I wonder, and I think that that's very true in a lot of the cases and a good way to work. But at the same time, I wonder if any of the problems that we then get to solve and kind of play around with would get solved earlier and or never occur if designers were brought in to kind of look at the play from the as it's being developed and as part of that what is being produced kind of thing. Have either of you ever been involved in a process where you're super early on in those stages?
Yes, I think back to this is now some time ago. I used to be part of a collective called the Inkwell, which sadly is no more. But they used to do no productions in itself really after a while, but just workshops of plays that were very much very, very raw in their development. So if I was given a script, it was something that was pretty hot off the presses, maybe not even with an ending. To crack, to figure out. And so I was actually brought in often as a sort of scenic thinker. I wouldn't even say scenic designer, because I wasn't designing solutions necessarily. I was designing what we sort of considered possibilities, because never in that process did I want to put a lid on something to be like, well, this is the solution to your problem, and be like, well, here's an approach that your play might take that might be a little wacky and untenable, but here's something that could potentially physicalize your environment in a way that might address how this can work. You know, it's very sort of more visually dramaturgical in the thinking, that I'd bring in visuals. I'd be like, well, this is what you're talking about. This is what this world is, according to me and my response to it in this moment. Is that sort of what you were thinking? So in some ways, like both validating and questioning the playwright and what they had written, and just sort of visually responding to what they have, which is a really fruitful process, I think, in both directions, because it showed me like that plays can be all sorts of all over the map and come up with all sorts of impossible things, and yet they are solvable. They are, you know, the world can be pretty endless in sort of both directions. So this sort of loop between writing and design just got me thinking differently.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the way that Deb talks about work, I think the important word here is that designers are still doing a dramaturgical process. Like, we're still doing a deep dive into it. That's not just trying to like solve this problem. It's more like, oh, we're dreaming up, like we're looking at it and reading the text and responding to it and like create and like building worlds based off of it. But that's just like another artist, another voice responding. So I think there's a lot of value in just getting those people in early and hearing those voices. Because yeah, I mean, it's not about and I mean, this is something that I say even in tech when we're doing an actual show. It's like, we shouldn't ever really get bogged down in talking about like the technical unless it's a real problem. Like, it's really got to be like, cool, what's the goal here? Like, what are we talking about? What are we dreaming of? Like, let's not get bogged down in like putting caps on things. It should all always be on the table. And the job of any artist in the room should be to throw up more ideas and more insight into it. And sometimes it's in ways that you just wouldn't expect. Like, I've done a play where I was like water became a thing that I like hooked onto, and the playwright later was like, no one that's done this has gotten it before, and they're like 2 other workshops, but like it's totally about like the ocean. And I was like, cool. We just have a different like visual dramaturgy that goes alongside of the textual analysis that actors and directors and other people do, actually is what creates kind of an exciting process. It's why theater is collaborative.
Right. You know, like I think the best parts of when all those things come together is like, we are visual storytellers. We are trying to tell the best story. Like what Patrick says is like, what is the goal here? What is the best story we could tell? There's infinite versions of how we could tell that story and infinite productions and possibilities there. But yeah, I think ultimately is like, I don't know. I love to find that like, does it tell the best story and it doesn't look really cool? You know, like I think there is an aspect of that too, that there's something where the aesthetics are really interesting and tell a great story. And that those are the best combinations for me.
And but I feel like if this did happen more often, if designers or Deb, I really like how you put it, scenic thinkers, or visual thinkers, I suppose, were brought in earlier on, there would be potentially more room for play in future productions of that, because more of those visual elements had been kind of mined in certain ways, and then the play can be written and or published in a way that in essence says like, here is this idea, improvise as you will, kind of thing, for a director or for a set of designers on a production. I'm thinking of I mean, Patrick, in your example, you know, you said you caught on to that idea of water for the playwright, and he was like, nobody ever caught that. And there's so much that could, like, I was thinking of something that dealt with water and this idea of like, a lot of times in the visual storytelling of a play, a playwright might get stuck on an idea and not really necessarily have an idea of how it's going to be accomplished, but just knows like, oh, I want this, and puts it into a script, and then it's up to a designer later on to like figure out and problem solve. Whereas if they were already a part of the process, hey, here's an idea. I think this play really needs this moment to happen, and in order for that to happen, here is an idea of a solution, or come up with your own kind of thing. I don't know.
I mean, I think we're in an era in theater where the whole idea of like honoring the playwright and like the play like stage directions and that kind of stuff is becoming more of a conversation than it was for like a long. It was very much like you have to do what is there. It was like it was a little bit stricter and a little bit more like there was a hierarchy to things, whereas with bringing people in to the process, what it's doing is something that I think we're all trying to do in the art form in general, which is to kind of shake up the hierarchical way that we make work. And so it's bringing someone in to like think about, to like exactly what you're saying. It's the moments in between the lines that people that like that's where like designers, that's our job.
That's where we live. Ooh, sorry, motorcycles around me.
Dogs and motorcycles.
We have a sound designer for this conversation tonight. We've got dogs and motorcycles at this point. While I'm thinking about this, for any of those of you watching, if you have any questions or comments for Deb or Patrick or myself, please feel free to put them in the comments. I will do my best to make sure that we keep track of those. Speaking of which, we actually did receive one a little earlier, asking about specifically design and virtual theater. And I want to kind of maybe guide this a little bit more and say that like right now in this past year, we were just talking about how it's been a year for us. So much development of new work and so much play has gotten a chance to occur in this because of the virtual because of the virtual elements, and now we're working on kind of getting rid of some of those boundaries between people in theater. But there's been a lot of new work development and play development on published pieces. Where do the design elements come in your mind, specifically in virtual work, in virtual presentations and productions, or does it have a place at all? I mean, I know that for myself, I've been thinking of kind of this year of virtual theater as it's still theater, but it's a different form of theater. And is there a place for specific types of designs in this format versus in the typical in-person theater format? It's like 12 questions for you. There you go.
I think for me, and forgive the strange idling noise in the background, I've done standard sort of virtual backgrounds, green screen kind of stuff, drawings. That's one means of it. I've done little sort of, like bust up designs, in costume where we're designing hair and dictating what people are doing for makeup and lighting. And tried to think about this sort of box, of like how one's hand takes some practice, but thinking about this frame is now our new stage and like what that means space-wise for things, which is unique. That like the idea of taking, I don't know, it's this coaster in front of me, but like taking it and chucking it along the bottom of a frame now gives a really sort of different visual idea, and being able to use size and scale and things that film does well is just a different kind of vocabulary, one that I'm learning rapidly in order to figure out how to manipulate this medium. But ultimately, like, I'm kind of a Luddite. Like, I use technology a fair amount, but more as a means of communication than a means of like art. Whereas I look at like the work that Patrick's doing, and I'm like, oh, Patrick's a master of like being able to manipulate the visual medium in a video way, in which I'm just like, yep, I'm gonna leave that to the people that do that, and I just continue to work in tangibles, manipulating where I know I can.
I mean, I think that's what's so funny about this year, right? I'm a video designer, and I have done very little virtual work this year because I commiserate with my other projection video design friends of like, we spent so much of our lives breaking this box to get stuff on, to like learn this medium that's all like a square of imagery and put it on three-dimensional stages. And I think that I'll out myself in a potentially like controversial opinion. Like I'm not a lover of virtual theater this year. Like I'm not.
Me neither.
I think that I think that Jason, to your point, I think something that's actually great about this year would be more what I would have liked to see, and has happened a lot, is more like new work development and conversations and kind of workshopping ideas and just sort of leveraging the access that going virtual has provided, as opposed to the medium of going virtual. Of like, cool, you can talk to more people. Like boundaries don't matter. You can talk to people that are in different time zones. You could share things for different price points. You can create like more community. That's more interesting to me, and how we're going to take those lessons into theater when we go back, versus like what I always say is that we're kind of just doing film's work poorly. Like we're gonna just it's an established medium that lives in this box, and we're just sort of being like, well, it's like Zoom theater. But then I was like, okay, but do you remember theater? When did you ever see actors, unless they're doing a direct address the camera? Like they're not talking to each other through the camera. But that's what so much about what we're doing is. And so it's lessons about this screen. And so, like I said, I think there's a lot of exciting work that has been done this year. People have started to learn these things, and I think that that's great. And I think that we're developing more like of a digital virtual language for storytelling. But yeah, I don't know. It's been a weird year. I've gotten all the requests that I've been like, I'm gonna have to say no, just because I'm trying to be really honest, to take this year to like things. But
It's funny that you said, I mean, you both were like, yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of it. And that's literally how we at Prologue ended up kind of doing this forward series, is because we had to kind of shift into a virtual format for our show last summer because of this, or whenever that was. Time is a construct. And when we did it work out? Sure. And there was a lot of really good stuff for it, but it became this thing of like, I don't personally feel any satisfaction from trying to create a production way. This is much to your point, Patrick, this is kind of poorly done television and film. This is something, it's a different medium. Although I will say that there's a lot that I've gotten a chance to learn as far as communication and being able to kind of break down some of those boundaries that were previously, that kept people from being able to do certain things together, and getting a chance to really find new stuff and kind of get that with, and look forward to like when we're able to get back in person, see and really be able to think through like, what do I want to bring with me when I go back. But yeah, as far as, I'm definitely a visual scenic design minded person. When I read a script, that's the first thing for me. And I get really excited when I can instantly picture something. And then it's been a lot of fun with these 5 workshops where I first get a chance to like talk with the playwright and the director, and my brain is like, oh, what if we this, and then you could have this as an overarching metaphor and all that kind of stuff. But then I'm like, yeah, I'm not the designer on this. I'm gonna just step away.
Well, what's funny to me about what you're saying there is, and this whole weird year of like my job specifically, my little like weird niche in theater was, and why I'm brought in to recontextualize it in terms of this conversation, like why I'm brought in for workshops and new work is that so many times the video and projection design is like a whole other layer of story and like almost a layer of directing and like playwriting that has to go along with everything, because you're visually scoring, creating new visuals to like really go along with everything. So like I see script, like that's what's funny, like this year should have been great for video people, but it's like actually it's not, because like that's how I see scripts. I see scripts through storyboards, through like different shots and how like that kind of stuff and how that can develop. But it's just interesting.
Yeah. question for both of you. How would you say, as designers, creating an originating design for a work, for a specific, I guess, particularly new work, differs from the quote unquote typical designing of a published play that's had a couple of iterations before? Does it differ, I guess, is the starting question.
I know. I'm like, I don't think it does, but you know, as I talk, I'm probably going to change my mind. So I think that no, I try to approach every script as if it's new. That I don't look at past productions unless it's so popularly established as to how it should be. I mean, this is true with like big golden age musicals. Like, I do think that you should know what the original looked like before you go off and design your own version, just because it's always going to come up in conversation. It's always in the sort of expectation, so it's like, know what the rules are before you then take them and break them. And I mean, I got to take them and break them in half and then burn them to the ground and then build them up again, but like it is yeah, I guess I just approach every text as if it's fresh, as much as I possibly can. So in that way, my process doesn't differ. It's not like I'm more open because it's a new play, because I think it's all going to change. Because if I don't make choices just as big and bold, that I would with an established script, thinking, oh, well, it will change, I will just shoot myself in the foot 2 weeks later. And I'll be like, well, you never made those choices, so now you're stuck. And now you have to, then you get sort of forced into a position to solve those things instead of actually having made a deliberate choice responding to the text on the way in. Costumes is a little, I mean, that's scenics, and costumes is a little different because I just want to stay a little bit more flexible, because a character could take a complete 90-degree or 180 turn in the rehearsal period. So you do want to remain flexible with that, but I don't know, that also happens in plays that are already published, and the actor may make an incredible discovery in the rehearsal process, and I don't want to be the one standing there to be like, no, stop, you absolutely cannot make any changes, I already determined all of this. That that your work wants to remain, and I need to remain, as flexible as possible within the given sandbox, budget, time, parameters, all those things. But yeah, I guess I don't approach them that differently.
Yeah, I don't think the approach is very different, because it's the same kind of dramaturgical process for analyzing the script. But I think that the room, it's kind of how it's more like the process in the room that's a little bit different for me, of like, I want to make sure, for me, I think one of the big jobs of a designer is like setting and like making sure you're managing expectations for your design field. And I think that that's important. And it's important so that it's not just like somebody doesn't devolve into fights. It's important so that we're all on the same page. And part of that for new work is setting the expectation that like playwrights don't feel, or the people that are developing it don't feel confined, that like, oh, we've got to change something. Like, you always want to keep it like really, you have to somehow stay way more on your toes because of how much the script can change versus an established work. Like in established work, you pretty much get a constant, like you'll have a concept and know kind of going in, like how we're approaching it. But like I've done a number of shows at like Kennedy Center, the TYA program there. And those, like, we did a new music. I think one of the last things I did in like 2019 was a new musical about like the moon landing. And we didn't even get the like final and tracks of the music until like really late. And I was like, oh, this music is totally like a different quality than I was expecting. Like, I've had the lyrics, but like I didn't know what the actual orchestration was. So we like threw out the entire concept, and we just had to be like, no, it's fine. Like it's not a big deal, even though we like, because that's what you sign up for with new work. And that's the exciting part. Like it's just making sure that we're all, the team and everyone in the room understands that that's kind of the challenge and the joy of doing it. So I think that's the only difference for me there is, yeah, the script is less, like we talked about before, it's less precious, it's more open. Everyone can talk about it in a different way, and just, yeah, you gotta know how to punt at the last second.
Yeah. No, it's true. I guess in the script being less precious, Well, both less precious and more precious. Less precious in the way that it can change, but more precious is that it's still young, it's still green, it's still in the play, it's still the playwright's baby. Having been on both sides of that, you get real close to a lot of things, sometimes in really unexpected ways. But I think because of that, in the best collaborations where there's a lot of trust on a team, again, by bringing in everybody early and everyone is there for the same mission, you're able to say, hey, this character's really coming across this way for me. Can we try this thing? And being open to, like character development. Like as a costume designer, if I'm working on a new work, I love to be in on table work. If I have the time, I love to sit there as the actors are discovering aspects of their characters, because then I'm changing my design as we're going. To respond to the things that they're responding to in a more immediate way. Because like I hate deciding a thing and then leaving for 3 weeks, then coming back and finding out that I'm totally wrong at design run. Because it is sort of whiplash. So getting effective rehearsal reports or getting, effective dramaturgical things or, getting questions in that sort of period where the room is still open. Because I've also been, I think Patrick, you've been in these processes too, where like the rehearsal period starts, you've done some design work, and then the room closes, and then you hear nothing. And then you get to design run, and suddenly the designers are invited back in, and we're all like, hey, wait, no, this is not what we talked about a month ago. Now everything's got to change. And then everyone's mad, because like now everything has to change. Well, why do you think it has to change? I'm like, because you didn't let me in to what was happening as you were building things. That can be a really, really tough place to be in, because then you look like the stubborn one. Mm-hmm. And maybe you are, but it just not being included and then suddenly being expected to have gone and rolled with it when you had no idea what was happening in the room.
Yeah, I think that goes back to like our designers collaborative dramaturgs that just have a different skill set, or are they like
service providers
expecting a delivery? Yeah, you're expecting like a service to be done.
Right.
And I think that's a very different approach. It's why I like new work, because generally the attitude is the former. You're invited in a little bit more. Mm-hmm. And I think it makes a huge difference. And as we all know, like the product is always better. Like when you have more voices in the room, like earlier, I've been in very few processes where we actually ran into like a too many cooks situation. Mm-hmm. And usually it really does end up being like ego goes away more. The more early people are invited in. Like it becomes less about like trying to win something or get something across at the end.
Right.
So.
But I do think that there is a fairly fine line. And this is one of the things that this point that you're kind of talking about. This is one of the things that I feel like I've learned over the course of this year that I'm hoping to bring forward with us as we go is keeping the process as collaborative as possible for as long as possible. And maybe even, in that respect, starting rehearsals really, really early, like a couple of months out from when we would actually start, and do a couple of days of table work where the designers are there and they're involved and they can throw out ideas. And then we go away. We come back a month later for a one-night meeting to do a read and to discuss things that maybe percolated over that month. And then we come back a month later, and then it's like, okay, now we're actually starting rehearsal. And it gives the performers and the artists involved and the designers and anybody else a chance to kind of like group think and percolate on these things and kind of throw out ideas. And maybe that's some semblance of there's a shared document that everybody can kind of put their ideas at, and we start the process by being like, check your egos at the door for the next 2 months. And it's just like, somebody might give you an idea and you want to run with it, cool. And if you don't, okay, fine. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. It's something I would love to be able to try if it's in the card, but also like, as we know that more money and all of that kind of stuff to be able to make sure everyone's being compensated for it. So. Mm-hmm.
I think that's a big part of it too. I mean, I have definitely had many versions of this conversation of like, if you want me to be in the room, because this is the other part of it too, is like, I do want to be in the room. However, I have to pay rent. I have bills. I have other things to do. I'm working on 3 other shows at a time, you know, that kind of thing. The realities of working in the city and being in the city as a designer. But you know, if you want to be in the room, compensate me for my time. Don't just expect that I'm going to be at your beck and call for 2 months, because it's just not humanly possible. But that is also sort of a fine line. I should not have to take enormous amounts of work to be able to afford to be in the room with you. But you know, that weird continual cycle of companies can only afford so much, and that's perfectly understandable. But at the same time, sometimes the lower the fee, the higher the expectation. So it's like figuring out how to balance that, because I do want to be there. I just know that sometimes maybe I come across as a jerk because I'm like, no, I can't, or I won't be there. Because that's just the reality of time.
I mean, there's also like making sure from the very outset, setting that as an expectation on the producer side of like, I would like it if you could be here these times. However, I recognize that, you know, you've got 3 gigs running versus I want you here. I know that you want to have, you have all these other things and you need to pay rent. So what's the numeric value of that? What is that question? And it's a question of, it's a hard question to answer for a lot of people because it incorporates the question of, well, how many hours do you expect to spend on this ahead of time? And the designer can take a guess, but it's very rare that that guess is accurate.
Actually true, yes.
Well, and I feel like that's what normally leads to, you see people relying on kind of like an earlier point of like relying on company members, or they rely on like people that they know and which just kind of in a lot of ways defeats the purpose of newer development when you're hearing the same voices over and over of like, invite more people in. And there's something to what you're saying, Jason, of like, yeah, if you also have these like a couple of meetings much further out, then what that might also mean is that, because I mean, this opens up a can of worms into like a much larger, what we're going back to problem, but like the process of making work, right? Like that development there, does the tech period need to look the same way that it's looked before? The same way that we're eliminating the 10 to 12 and we're going to like, we should be going to like a 5-day work week and stuff. Or if we have overlapping schedules and things, instead of it being like, oh, I can only be here for 2 days, but then you've got my associate and like, they're all like in the end, you might feel way more comfortable with that associate, and you might like that associate might understand things more because of actually the work that's been done leading up to it versus all of it happening right there. Like there's a trade-off to like, if we do expand this, what are all the different ways that it will push and pull on it to make it a better product? I have no actual answers on this. I'm just riffing off of what.
No, yeah, I don't have an answer either. I think it's potentially worth exploring in some way,
but point for this conversation is that if you're doing a workshop and you're an artist, you should be compensated for your time.
Yep.
Because workshops are work. Like I think that's a huge thing that we still struggle with, right? It's like as an industry and a community, it's always like it's a workshop, so like it's an opportunity for you to do this thing. It's like, well, no, it's still work, and it's still valuable, and it's part of seeing designers as not just producers of product and seeing us as people that are involved in the process. Like you should still want us in the room, even if you're not getting a design at the end of it.
Right. Yeah. Because often in the workshop process for me, I'm doing research on the fly as I'm sitting in rehearsal. I'm pulling together images, you know, I'm sort of visually jamming on what I'm responding to in order for me to sort of analyze. Because I love text, you know, but I don't use text, I use pictures. And so in order to really communicate what that design could be, or what the possibilities are, I am looking at visuals like the whole time. So in some ways I'm executing the first whole chunk of the design while I'm sitting there in workshop. I'm not just like sitting there waiting for someone to tell me what to do. That's not why I'm there.
Yeah. And it's interesting because that then becomes more likely, more often than not, that becomes the preliminary portion of the design for that the second part of that workshop, which is like workshop into production.
Mm-hmm.
So you've already done all that work, but you know it was an opportunity. So like you don't need to be paid, right? No.
Yeah, no. Well, and so it was strange too in the workshop process. Often, like, I will be brought in to do the workshop, and then I won't get hired to do the show. And then I'm just like, well, if I'm doing it for free, then I'm mad. You know, I'm like, if you paid me to do the thing, then I'm like, whatever. You know, you paid me for that week of work. I don't have an obligation to move on to the thing, understanding that that thing left for Broadway or whatever it was. You know, but things being taken in chunks. You know,
And I just think that the workshop process is a valuable exercise. So it's a place for like, maybe it's where like younger designers or younger artists and people that are getting started, maybe it is the kind of thing where like it very well might happen that like you bring them in for the workshop, but then you do want to hire someone more experienced for their show or something like that, but you're still paying them for the time and they get to work. I mean, like they get to do that work. And I'm not trying, because I think that that's just sort of looking at all these plays as like they're going to have longer lives. We all would love to imagine that if we're on the workshop, then we're in it forever. But like, you know, I'm also thinking about how we can make space for people that are trying to like start out and figure things out. And, you know,
I mean, I would love to see the format in which that designer that was like brought on, if they were young in career, you know, early career or something, is then brought on to be the assistant or the associate if
Right.
that show does move on, instead of just being like, thanks so much for your work, see you later.
yeah. But I think that it's like one of the things that takes so long as the designer to develop as a skill is like actually working some of these muscles of like of interrogating the work and everything. And younger designers are really focused on just like getting the next thing and like making everyone in the room happy and like getting the product done. And they don't get the privilege of being a more established designer that's able to have these opinions in their room as much. Like that's sort of, it's reductive, but it's something that I think would be valuable for younger people.
Yeah.
Not to ask you to delve too deeply into that, Patrick, but could you maybe speak a little more to that idea of that, be like interrogating the work, as you put it, and that skill set that you're talking about, specifically this idea of like if we're talking this idea of like younger designers getting a chance to maybe develop that skill in workshops, like how would that, I don't know, maybe how would that look, or how would you guide?
I think to clarify a little bit about what I mean too, it's that younger design, it's just the nature of the work, right? Like when you've been working for longer, you know, and have certain skills that you might not have when you're starting out. Yeah. And when you don't, but if the expectation is not to actually create the product at the end, then you've eliminated that pressure on the younger designer. So they can actually just be in the room to think about it and to be analytical and not to be worried about like, oh, how would I do this practically? Because I haven't actually done 50 shows to have that shorthand knowledge. They are just able to kind of more abstractly be present. And I think that's what I'm getting at a little bit. Does that answer the question or not?
Yeah. Would you equate that with something along the lines of kind of like in a kind of an educational setting where you're getting the chance to do a design, but it's basically completely theoretical because there's really nobody else involved in that process. You're doing a design based off of a script that you read, and there's no money involved, and nobody really is going to say like, yeah, that's a really cool thing, but how do you expect actors to really do this kind of idea? That now you have the rest of the people in the room to talk through. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it's kind of that's what we're getting at. It's educational. It's close to an educational model, but it's also not done in like a design studio class with helping other designers. You're actually able to do it with people that are going to go, well, wait, that set won't work because I need doors or I need more floor space. Like you're actually able to get to just theorize of all the stuff you're talking about, but have the conversations with the other collaborators. And so that's what's kind of exciting about workshop spaces. Why?
Yeah, it's taking the design out of the back.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, because I think, yeah, like the classroom projects in school, thinking about like what I do in like my beginning design classes, you know, like, yeah, it's a vacuum. I, as the professor, will be the closest thing that they get to like a director. But even for me, I'm just like, that's great. You know, maybe this thing, have you thought about this? You know, and I spend a lot of time in intro classes just asking questions to be like, so in the script, it says this. Did you think about that? Did you think about the 7 ways that this might manifest? You know, and it's just getting to like analyze better. I'm constantly working on sort of textual analysis skills and how they manifest visually. They could set it on the moon. If it makes sense dramaturgically within itself, then fine. You know, I'll go with it. By the time they get to advanced, we start asking more questions, you know, but I think that, yeah, these play development processes, the opportunity to be in the room with like a director and other designers, a living playwright and a team and a dramaturg, you know, to like be able to talk about it, that is so that is so cool. I didn't get to do that until, you know, after I graduated from undergrad. And I thought, man, this is exactly what I want to be doing. Like I was very fortunate in my early career post grad school to do some shows at Woolley, and I remember sitting in a room with Craig Wright. We were working on Grace, and so Craig Wright of 6 Feet Under, and of course I was like fangirling out. I was like, oh my god, this is Craig Wright of like 6 Feet Under, my god, you know. But he was so like sweet and normal, you know. And I was like, hey Craig, when you wrote this scene and then you put these characters in their situation in reverse, you know, like why did you do that? And just like the opportunity to be able to sit and have a conversation about why someone made the choices they did and then be able to influence what they do with the next production, like that's power, that's magic.
Yeah, I mean, I think it emboldens them in a way that it would be really valuable. It provides this kind of you know, I don't know what we've now gone on down a tangent of how to support younger designers, but that's fine.
Right.
Something I care about.
I'm always thinking about this.
Yeah, but it's like it's this idea of like you don't have to work your. It also takes away this idea of you don't have to work your way up through like the smaller room into the larger theater kind of like mentality of like no. You just learn how to think about theater. Like, it doesn't matter what size room you're in. Like that's the, you know, it's logical to all of us, but like it's not practical. Like people are always like, oh god, the first time you like work in a larger space or like a lower theater or something, you're like, oh god, I've only done like black box like 150 seaters and like what am I doing? I shouldn't be here. But it's like, no, you know that you should be here because you've done this process. And it doesn't, like the size doesn't matter. It's all about just, you've done the work. The work is not the practical side. The work is the thinking and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That's the best part.
I mean, this is all good stuff because I mean, like, look, we're just finishing up our first inaugural, you know, session of this new work series. But like, I would like to be able to continue these things, and so maybe in this next iteration, maybe in our next, you know, year, season, whatever we would end up calling these things, that we get designers involved in them in the process, or a designer to start and kind of build from there. And I think it'd be kind of a really interesting chance or opportunity. Maybe there's a senior designer and student designers, or I don't know how it works, but now I'm just spitballing and going, hey, is this a good idea, guys? What do you think?
Like we're workshopping a process.
We're workshopping workshops.
Whoa.
Okay. How
Gets
meta.
super meta.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was gonna say, I think it comes down to also personalities. Like when Patrick talked about ego, there are some people who can put their ego down, you know, and maybe they are not right for the new development process, you know. But I think that's individual. Like there are definitely times when I cannot put my own ego away, you know, and so I just need to be like, this is not the project for me. And then there'll be other times when I'm like, yeah, I'm willing to you know, listen and be open in a room. So I think even in the same person, one process might not be right for them, you know. Like if you asked me to workshop a new musical, probably wouldn't do so well. You know, it's not, you know, whereas like call Patrick. And it's just because like I'm too picky. My view of like what a musical should be is just too narrow. And I don't do a lot of musicals, you know, for that reason. I know what I like and I know what I dislike, and I'm just like, yeah, so I end up doing a lot of straight plays. That's totally fine. But or I'll do plays with music. That's totally different. But yeah, I think it takes a certain self-awareness in a designer to know what they're good for and what they might be less good for, what might be more of a challenge. And the same with any artist entering into a new space. You're creating a different kind of contract than I think when you are just sort of doing the gig and getting in and getting out.
Yeah, I'm that idea of this being a gig work economy, this or this business being all about the gig work. I'm wondering if that is going to, especially for designers and technicians, if that is going to continue. If when we return to in-person productions and in-person rehearsal processes, if it's going to be, if it's going to be able to be maintained, that idea of you're going to do 6 different productions basically at a time and just be doing, you know, jump to jump to jump, as opposed to that idea of sticking with one thing and really putting everything you have for a little bit into that. I don't know.
I think that there's a great, and I know that Deb is actually a part of this, but I'm going to plug a series of essays that are coming out now on HowlRound, which is Design in the Time of Reckoning. There's one that I've read that really struck me from a former, actually, Emerson classmate of mine, Masha, just about, it really kind of lays out for anyone that's watching, or like it lays out what the realities of designing and the design career are like. In a very, like, that's, we talk about like lessons learned from this year. There's a lot of, this was not sustainable. Like, this is like, there's like so many problems with how we do this stuff. So I think that, so what we're talking about here in terms of workshops and how we develop projects, this is all about how we address changing just the culture and practical way of how we make work. And that's, all these conversations are really important if we're going to return to making work, because we can't just go back to doing the same stuff we were doing before.
And you said that these essays are going to be up on going to be up on HowlRound, or already?
They were all published last week. They're all up now.
Well, congrats. That's awesome. Look at us. All 3 of us now have Emerson contact, I guess, then. That's an interesting way to do that. Cool. I don't specifically have any other questions that I had written down, so I don't know if there is any other things or topics or questions that had come up for either of you that you want to bring up, or not. I don't know. You don't have to, but give you the opportunity to kind of throw out other things if you have anything.
Like, I could talk about this all day. One thing that I would bring up, that actually thinking about the HowlRound series of interviews, we've been working on that in various configurations for, my God, 3+ months. I think we all sort of started talking about it. And one thing that came up, but directly and obliquely, is the idea of like design and time reckoning, you know, the idea that like our industry would explode eventually, you know, because of just time and things being completely untenable. And some of it is because of hierarchical structure, some of it is because of patriarchy, some of it is because of just racism systemic throughout our field. And then what we kind of kept on coming back to was the idea of like designers being part of the leadership and designers as leaders in the industry, because I think that there is an assumption, I don't know if it's dangerous, it just is, you know, we'll just state it as fact, that the majority of artistic directors in this nation right now are directors, or are actors become, you know, who have become directors, but that the leadership sort of sits in the hands of, yes, a lot of cis white men, but also in the hands of people on the sort of performance side of things and not in the design or dramaturgy or even technician side of things. That there's, yeah, I don't know. There are probably brilliant people who are production managers currently who would be incredible artistic directors because of their ability to see an entire constellation of schedules and understand what everyone in the theater does. And so I don't know why we've prized performance training over design training. And I don't know. I'm so curious of the two of your thoughts on that.
No, and that's something I wanted to bring out too, because I've known, I mean, I'm saying like I've known Deb for a long time. I know that you come by your kind of current hyphenated identity in theater world very like just very honestly, and like through these weird, just like this journey that you've taken. It's been great. But to your
Weird
point, I have to put it Twitter. But I feel like a lot of artists or like designers specific, like to bring it back to just design, maybe they're like, oh, I want to be a director designer or a playwright designer. And I think that it's not always motivated by the urge to not necessarily do that so much as it's an urge to get a different seat at the table. It's like if you're going to elevate yourself in the industry, you've got to suddenly be generating work in a different way. You've got to have that director or playwright role as we talk about hierarchy and things. And I don't know I don't think that's right. I was going to say, I was not going to come down with an opinion, but I was like, no, that's not right. Like, yeah. So.
It's so interesting that point you bring up, Deb, is so interesting. It's actually something I don't think I've ever considered, which might be in and of itself a problem. But
You're fine.
the idea there, though, like, I mean, through my training would have been as an actor, but the moment I left school, I was like, yeah, I don't want to be an actor. I'd rather work on the technical side. And then I spent time learning both soundboard, lightboard operations and sound design, followed by teaching myself essentially to become a tech director. And that's how I tend to kind of start looking at a process is from the technical side, which I don't know if I ever actually considered, although it probably always subconsciously was like, I understood that that's how I was approaching something.
Well, I think it goes back to the point that we've made a couple times here, which is, are designers collaborators or are they service providers? And like and changing how we think about that, of like in the workshop context and just in the general industry context. Yep. Like, so.
Right. I'm hearing your call and boosting it. I think, Patrick, the idea to start looking at designers and technicians as collaborators rather than essentially means to an end is necessary, is something that will only help any of these processes and any of these products, because I'm sure both of you have experienced this, but when you have a group of people that all fully buy into something, the quality both of the workplace and the work product, it exponentially grows. So, and I'm not even saying like, oh, it has to be a company of people and everyone has equal, maybe not, but still like finding ways to give everybody the opportunity to fully buy into something. And maybe it is something as simple as saying like, you are all collaborators on this project and your voice will be heard, kind of. I mean, even in that, something as simple as saying that and meaning it, not just lip service.
I think some directors in particular are really good at that. I'll shout out Paige Hernandez Fun, who I work with a ton. Paige is really good about like bringing everybody into a room, being like, all right, we're all going to work on this thing. We're all here for the same goal. And really, truly like taking time to listen to everybody's opinions on something before making a final decision. Because I think I've also been part of rooms that are like incredibly collaborative where everyone is like truly equal, but then like no one is making a decision. And that can be very tough because I'm like, I have to get this done. Like there is the reality of like there does need to be a tangible product on stage as the result of all this experimentation. So I think that there does need to be some sort of agreement within that formed ensemble. And I think of most collaborations as sort of like, oh, it's the hired ensemble that's come in to do the thing. If that ensemble can make the decision on how they will mutually make decisions, and it's okay if it's like, we're all going to point to you and you are going to have the last word, or you two people are going to have the last word once you've talked. I do think that is an important part of the process, is like how decisions are made.
Yeah, I think that there's a hesitation when people talk about like the call for like wider voices and representation on like in what we're talking about, but it doesn't necessarily always just mean that everything needs to break all the different hierarchical structures in a totally different way. Like there is a way to still have some structure because it is necessary to a practical point, but like it's more just about inviting more voices in. It's not saying that like, I do believe that, yes, I think that it would be interesting to see what happens if designers are leading companies or doing that kind of thing. But also that's not always like, that's not the only thing we're saying. It's bring us in differently, bring technicians in. Like it's about creating a space that invites the voices that are supposed to be collaboratively making work in the room, but only some of those voices actually are really feel that that's an open invitation.
Right. Yeah. So gotta walk the talk.
Yeah, I was like, cool. Other thoughts. I mean, I also don't want to. I want to respect your time. It's we've been going for a little while, and I don't want you to feel like you have to keep going. So obviously, yes, this conversation and or anything to do with this conversation is multi-layered, and I agree, Deb. I could probably talk about this for hours. However, do we really want to right now?
Yes, this world has to talk about like how to workshop new plays, and now we're talking about how to like break the theater. It's fine.
Yeah, I know, right?
The idea of, and I'll just say it, I feel like the idea of bringing design and designers into the workshop process by itself is in essence breaking, attempting to break the theater. And like this idea that this is how it's always been done. Well, we now had a huge, wrench thrown in the works there, and it gave us pause. It gave us time to look at all of this and say, okay, well, this is how it was done, but now we get a chance to like revisit some of these ideas. And we've seen a lot of upheaval in the past year on just processes of management and how the rehearsal process or production process needs to change in order to really provide for the artists and the people involved. And so, I mean, if we're spending all of this time rethinking these things, I'm not saying reinvent the wheel, but let's take a look at how we're making this every time, or if it's worth, that kind of stuff, I guess.
No, I mean, like we talked at the very beginning of this, right, about like virtual stuff and like lessons that you can learn from film, but like just as a really quick, like on a film, people always talk about like, oh, this film was brilliantly directed by this person. It's like, yeah, the director of photography also had a huge role in how that movie looked that you're talking about. The editors had a huge role in how that looked. Like there's it's not that's not one person that's making that. It's being made, and not just like production design, like what we consider like designing. There are voices that collaboratively go into the shaping of things that we can, it's all about kind of compartmentalizing things and working, like together, as opposed to like everyone is going to do all the stuff together. It's more like maybe this person is going to be dealing more with this and this and this, and like taking different leadership things that all have. Yeah, I should stop before it's like a whole other 4-hour workshop.
No, I mean, it's like you bring in.
Continue next time on
Yeah,
Behind the Scenes.
I know,
with-
truly.
Um,
And it's like you're bringing in the Avengers, right? You know, so everybody is like an expert in their own field. And so there will be a certain automatic difference, you know, from one to the other. I know very, very little about light. So when I speak with the lighting designer and I'm doing scenery, I'm like, well, here's sort of what I envision. I don't know how you want to accomplish that. That part of it is up to you. But what's important for me is that like this piece of this is highlighted. Done. Get out of the way. It feels warm. Right. You know, but at least we'll have had the conversation. Like I'm not going to dictate to them what I know nothing about. But I do want to talk about it because I do have feelings about it. And just having that opportunity to do that in the room. I've been part of so many processes where like if I'm costume designing, I'm handed a finished set. And then it's my problem to deal with it. Or I mean, Patrick, my God, you know, is always probably being handed finished sets. It's like, well, now it's your problem. And so it's like these things get hot potatoed around instead of being talked about together in a room where everyone can sort of talk about things equally.
Yeah. Okay. I'll make that executive call because I want to make sure I want to be aware of your time and your and everything for you. So before we finish for the night, I want to start by saying thank you both for joining us. This is not the end of this conversation by a long shot, I'm sure. And I hope to get a chance to chat more with you both about this stuff and all that kind of and other things. You know, I have other conversations with both of you, hopefully coming up very soon. But before we take off for the night, again, I wanted to say thank you and also give you both a chance to do some shout outs, do some maybe shameless plugs on other things you have coming up that you want to share with people if there are those things. Patrick, you're first.
Sure. Yeah, weirdly, I don't have any theater-y things I can plug right now that I can talk about, or so we talked about like having different roles and weird things like that. So I'm gonna plug that I read a children's book that's coming out in like a week or two. That'll be available. It's called Star with a Spark. That'll be available through Politics and Prose bookstores here in DC.
Excellent.
So yeah.
Well, congrats. Deb?
Patrick, and you say you're not a multi-hyphenate. Of course you are.
Nope.
You're like, no,
I'm just a video designer that wrote a book once. Like that's it.
Oh God, please. What I can plug a couple things. With Rorschach Theater for the past 5 months. I mean, longer now. We put out 5 chapters of Box in a program called Distance Frequencies, which is essentially a subscription service, but it's like a subscription show. You get 1 box a month that is full of different artifacts and letters that is telling a story over 7 sort of episodes. And you're going to an area of DC and opening up the box and then experiencing the story as it unfolds in an environment. So I've been working with the team there, and Rorschach's my home theater. So it's one of those moments where actually being part of a company is really a joy because I'm getting to explore a different sort of side of design thinking to be part of that team. The other project that I'm working on is with the Arcanists, which is called Shrines. That will be unveiled March 21st. And it's really the best way I can describe it is as a public art project that is interactive. And I think that's all I will say for now, but it's going to be really awesome and in 6 points all around the DC area.
Cool. Keep it mysterious.
Yes.
Well, awesome. Great. Again, thank you both so very much for your time and for your expertise. I look forward to getting a chance to chat with you both again soon. And for anybody that was watching or is still watching, because there are still some of you, this conversation is part of our Forward a New Work series. We have begun our 5th and final workshop process, which will culminate in a reading of our most recent workshop, which is Webster's Bitch. by Jacqueline Bircher that will take place on Friday, March 12th at 8 p.m. It is free to the public. If you would like to register, please see our website, www.prologuetheater.org. And with that, I wish you all a good night. Thank you again, both.
Thank
Thank you.